"Daddy, the girl in the trunk is asking to be let out," our 5-year-old daughter said during a quiet family drive. Her innocent voice cut through the silence, making my heart skip a beat. I turned to my husband, trying to read his reaction. His face, which had been calm a moment ago, turned pale. I couldn't tell if he was trying to play dumb or was genuinely frightened by her words. He glanced back at our daughter through the rearview mirror, his eyes wide with fear. "That's a scary thing to say," he muttered, trying to dismiss it. "You shouldn't tell such lies." I glared at him from the passenger seat, feeling a knot of suspicion tightening in my chest. "Maybe we should pull over at the rest area," I suggested, my voice sharper than I intended. It had been 6 years since we got married. I had always been supportive of my husband, even though his job kept him busy. I had been the one holding things together at home, managing everything while he focused on his career. But now, with our daughter's strange words hanging in the air, I felt a chill of uncertainty. Was something dark about to be revealed? "My name is Lisa Jackson. I married my husband, James, when I was 30 years old. He is 5 years older than me, and our relationship had always seemed solid. The year after we got married, our daughter Julia was born, bringing so much joy into our lives. She's been growing up healthy and lively, and just recently turned 5. Our family had been living busy but happy days, filled with love and laughter. How about going to the zoo next Friday?" James suggested, trying to change the mood. "Yay! I want to see the giraffes." Julia squealed with excitement, her earlier comment seemingly forgotten. I couldn't help but smile at their cheerful conversation, feeling a bit of the tension ease away. James had always been a kind and loving husband. Since we started dating, he was attentive and caring, and that didn't change after we got married and had Julia. On his days off, he would eagerly join in on family activities, playing with Julia and making her laugh. He was the perfect father, always there for us. I often thought about how lucky I was to have married him. Watching James and Julia together brought me a deep sense of happiness. Our life was good, stable, and filled with love. But little did I know, those peaceful days were about to be shattered. One day, James came home with a heavy sigh, his face looking weary and troubled. "You're being transferred to a different department?" I asked, noticing his downcast expression. "Yeah," he replied, his voice flat. "It's company policy. They want me to gain experience in different places." His words felt like the first crack in our happy life. I didn't know why, but something about this transfer made me uneasy. I could sense that there was more to the story, something James wasn't telling me, and as our daughter's strange words echoed in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. James was being transferred to the busiest department in his company, which meant he might not be able to spend as much time with us. The news hit our family hard, especially Julia. "Daddy, are you not going to play with me anymore?" she asked, her big eyes filled with worry. James, trying his best to reassure her, gently stroked her hair and said, "I'll do my best to spend as much time with you as possible, Julia. Let's go to the zoo again sometime soon." Despite his comforting words, I could see the regret in his expression. He knew this transfer was going to change things for us, and the thought of it weighed heavily on his mind. As I watched him with our daughter, a tightness grew in my chest, overwhelmed with emotions. The transfer didn't involve a change in salary or require us to move, but it was still a big deal for our family. Just the thought of having less time together made me feel incredibly lonely. However, I knew the one feeling the most vulnerable was James. Adjusting to a new, more demanding environment would be tough for him. "Please don't push yourself too hard," I said, trying to hide the worry in my voice. I knew James had a tendency to throw himself fully into his work, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. That's why I worried about him overdoing it, and unfortunately, my concerns turned out to be justified. At first, James managed to balance his work and home life. He still made time for family activities and found moments to rest, despite his busier schedule. But about a month after the transfer, everything changed. His time at home decreased dramatically. He started working overtime, often coming home late at night, long after Julia had gone to bed. It became more common for him to go out for drinks with clients, and he even began working on his days off. But there was something else that concerned me even more. One day, I cautiously asked him, "Hey, can you take a day off next Friday? Julia misses you, and you've been working too hard lately." James looked at me with a tired, frustrated expression. "Who do you think I'm working so hard for? Should I just turn down client meetings and risk getting fired?" he snapped. I quickly replied, "I didn't mean it like that. I'm just worried about you." "That's none of your business," he muttered, brushing me off. "Anyway, make sure you have money ready for next week's drinking party." His words stung, and I could see how much the stress was affecting him. James, who had always been kind and patient, was now irritable and short-tempered. He started taking out his frustrations on me more frequently, and I found myself walking on eggshells around him. What worried me even more was how he was spending money extravagantly, claiming it was necessary for entertaining clients. This new habit was beginning to impact our living expenses, adding financial stress to an already tense situation. Because I knew how kind he used to be, I was more worried than angry about his current behavior. It was clear to me that the pressure his new job was getting to him, and I feared he was going to collapse from overwork if things didn't change. I felt helpless, not knowing how to make things better for him or for our family. As the months passed, James's situation only worsened. 5 months after his transfer, he reached a point where he was coming home mostly just to sleep. Our conversations became brief, and the connection we once had felt distant. Julia, feeling the absence of her father, started to show signs of sadness. She often wore a forlorn expression, missing the time they used to spend together. Seeing her like that broke my heart. I knew we couldn't go on like this. I needed to find a way to help James before his relentless work schedule took an even bigger toll on our family. But I didn't know where to start, and the weight of it all was becoming too much to bear. I knew things couldn't go on like this, so I started trying to figure out a way for James to take a break. He was clearly overwhelmed, and our family was suffering because of it. But just as I was beginning to make plans, more bad things started to happen, almost as if the universe was working against us. The worst blow came when my mother, who had been battling an illness for several years, suddenly passed away in the hospital. The moment I heard the news, it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "No, Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. My father had died when I was young, so my mother was the only parent I had left. Losing her felt like losing the last piece of my childhood. I couldn't even have a proper conversation with her before she passed away, and that regret weighed heavily on me. When the call came, I was at home, and I was so shocked that I couldn't move for a while. I just stood there, frozen, as the realization hit me that she was really gone. But what hurt even more was James's reaction. When I told him about my mother's passing, his response was unbelievably cold. "Hey, do I have to go to that funeral too?" he asked, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. I stared at him, my eyes wide with disbelief. Yes, the relationship between James and my mother might have been distant, but she was still his mother-in-law. She was family. I couldn't understand how he could be so indifferent, especially at a time like this. "What are you saying?" "Of course, you have to go," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a family funeral." "Don't get mad at me," he muttered, rolling his eyes. Why does this have to happen now? I had plans too." His words cut through me like a knife. In the past, James would have comforted me, perhaps by rubbing my back and grieving with me together. But now, as he sighed in dissatisfaction, he seemed like a completely different person from the one I had promised to spend my life with. Naturally, he didn't help with any of the preparations for my mother's funeral. I arranged everything alone, feeling more isolated than ever. On the day of the service, James remained silent and sullen. He didn't offer any support or comfort, and after the funeral ended, he simply said, "It's over now, right? I'm heading home first," and left without helping with the cleanup. I was initially confused by his reaction, but by then, I had lost the energy to be angry. I was simply bewildered and deeply disappointed in him. No matter how busy or stressed he was from work, his behavior at the funeral was unacceptable. When did my husband become such a cold person? Despite feeling frustrated with him, I finished cleaning up with Julia by my side. She was too young to understand everything that was happening, but she could sense that something was wrong and did her best to help me. "Mom, Julia will help you," she said, her small voice bringing a bit of comfort to my aching heart. After the funeral, I decided to stop by my parents' house for a short while. It wasn't far from our home, and I wanted to say a final goodbye to the place that held so many memories of my mother. Although it was a sad visit, I felt it was something I needed to do for my own peace of mind. When I arrived at my parents' house with a heavy heart, I took a deep breath and walked inside. The house felt empty, a shell of what it used to be. As I stood in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of my mother's life, I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me. But before I could even begin to process my feelings, something unexpected happened. "Mom, wait a moment," Julia suddenly shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "Huh, Julia, what's wrong?" I asked, startled by her sudden change in behavior. As soon as we arrived at my parents' house, Julia's expression had shifted dramatically. Without another word, she dashed straight into the back room, leaving me standing there, puzzled and concerned. I quickly followed her, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and confusion, wondering what could have caused her to react like this. I had taken Julia to visit my mother's place several times before, but I had never seen her act like this. Curious and concerned, I hurried to follow her as she moved with a sense of purpose. Julia stopped in front of the dresser, her small hands reaching for the second drawer from the bottom. It was as if something was drawing her to it. "Mom, Grandma wants you to have this," she said, holding up an old hand mirror. The sight of the mirror took my breath away. It was an item that had always been precious to my mother. She cherished it so much that she rarely used it, and I didn't even know where she kept it. I stood there, stunned, as I realized that Julia had somehow found this hidden treasure. "How did you know it was here? And what do you mean, Grandma wanted me to have it?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. "When Grandma was sleeping earlier, she told me that you were sad and asked me to give this to you," Julia answered innocently, her eyes wide with sincerity. I couldn't hide my surprise. Her words sent a chill down my spine. There was no way Julia could have known about the existence of this hand mirror, let alone where it was kept. Yet here she was, holding it out to me with a calm certainty that was both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Wanting to understand what was happening, I decided to ask her some questions. I asked about things she couldn't possibly know. Tomorrow's dinner menu I was thinking about, and even thoughts I had during the funeral. To my astonishment, Julia answered each question correctly, as if she had read my mind. It became clear to me that my daughter had a mysterious ability to know what people were thinking. I was both amazed and bewildered. "Wow, that's amazing, Julia. You know everything," I said, stroking her head gently, still trying to wrap my mind around this revelation. I had always thought that the idea of mysterious abilities was just something from stories, never imagining that my own daughter might possess such a power. Julia, proud of her newfound ability, put her hand on her hip and gave me a confident look. "That's right. Julia knows about Dad, too." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. What she told me next was incredibly unbelievable and unforgivable. Julia revealed things about James that shook me to my core. I listened in stunned silence as she spoke, realizing that the man I had married was not who I thought he was. A few weeks after my mother's funeral, I decided it was time to confront James. On a morning when he was getting ready to leave for work, I casually mentioned, "By the way, I'm visiting my friend with Julia next Friday." James, who had been focused on getting out the door, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He frowned, looking genuinely troubled. "Really? Oh no, I'm off that day. That's too bad," he said, his voice filled with artificial concern. I could sense the insincerity in his tone. It was clear to me now that he was hiding something. I let out a small, knowing smile, careful not to reveal my true feelings. Now that I knew the truth, there was no love left for James inside me. That Friday, I left home with Julia as planned. We spent about an hour away, giving me time to gather my thoughts and prepare for what I needed to do. When we returned home, Julia pointed towards the garage and said, "Dad's over there." I took a deep breath and walked towards the garage, where the shutter was still down. My heart was pounding, but I knew what had to be done. I lightly knocked on the shutter and called out, "James, I know you're in there. Open it." There was a moment of silence, then a hesitant voice replied, "Huh, Lisa? I thought you and Julia had plans," James said, his voice filled with surprise. "It's canceled," I replied calmly. "If you're going somewhere, we want to come with you." He sounded flustered and hesitant, clearly not expecting this. "Oh, okay," he stammered, reluctant to open the garage shutter. I had a pretty good idea of what was going on inside, but decided to stay quiet and observe. "Julia wants to go for a drive too," I added, hearing the hope in her voice. Unable to resist, James had no choice but to agree. A few minutes later, he reluctantly opened the garage, and we started our drive together. Sitting in the passenger seat, I looked at James as he drove. His profile was tense, and it solidified my final decision. Life with James had been enjoyable and happy, but I knew those days would never come back. "Hey, did you know Julia has a special power?" I finally brought it up as we merged onto the highway. James furrowed his brows, confused by my sudden confession. "Huh, what's that supposed to mean?" "That's a silly joke," he laughed dismissively. "Daddy, the girl in the trunk is asking you to let her out." Julia suddenly raised her voice from the back seat. I watched as James's face turned pale. He glanced at our daughter through the rearview mirror with a frightened expression. "What a scary thing to say. You shouldn't tell such lies," he said nervously. "But it's true," Julia insisted. "Then should we pull over at the rest area?" I suggested, trying to support Julia's claim. James immediately looked at me, startled. "Huh, we don't need to do that. It's just a kid's joke," he said, trying to brush it off. "Julia has a mysterious power, you know. Besides, it's hot today, and it could be dangerous if someone's really in there." He must have thought my suggestion made sense. After flinching and stiffening, he reluctantly headed towards the rest area with a contorted expression on his face. Upon arrival, we left Julia in the air-conditioned car and went outside to check the trunk. "I don't think there's anything in there. Come on, quickly," I urged to James, who was hesitating. Realizing he couldn't escape anymore, James nervously opened the trunk, breaking into a cold sweat. In the next moment, a young woman jumped out, her face flushed red from the heat. "I knew you were cheating," I shouted, my suspicions confirmed. The young woman, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable, stood there while James shook his head nervously. "No, it's not like that. She is a colleague from work. We were just working together," he stammered, trying to explain. "Wow, working in the trunk of our car?" I retorted sarcastically. "At the new apartment you're doing a job?" James's excuses were pathetic and unbelievable. It turned out that while Julia and I were out, James had been cheating with this woman at home. They were about to go for a drive when we returned unexpectedly, so he had no choice but to hide her in the trunk. As the woman was taken away, James seemed unable to grasp the situation fully. He kept trying to come up with more excuses, but I wasn't listening anymore. I knew our marriage was over. The trust and love we once had were gone, replaced by betrayal and lies. I looked at Julia, who was watching everything quietly from the car. I knew I had to be strong for her to move on and build a new life without James. I laughed at how ridiculous James's lie was, standing my ground as I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag. "And what is this?" I asked, showing him the paper. It read, "Let's go on a drive date on Friday." James and the woman, Janice, turned pale when they saw it. It was no surprise they could see their flirty email exchanges printed right there. Thanks to Julia, I had found out everything. On the day of my mother's funeral at my parents' house, my daughter had told me, "Daddy has been spending a lot of time with Janice lately. I'm sad because Janice is taking Daddy away from me." After witnessing Julia's strange ability to know things, I became suspicious and decided to keep an eye on James. Sure enough, I found undeniable proof of his affair on his phone, so I had made up the fake plan to catch him in the act. "It's a shame this drive turned out this way," I said sarcastically. "It's unfair to look through my phone without permission." James protested, his body tense as he reacted to my words. His absurd remark made me burst into laughter. I had thought he was just busy with work, but it turned out he was spending time with Janice, using our money for their dates. Who exactly is being unfair here? I shot back. "By the way, I've been recording everything since we got into the car." Remembering all the wrongs James had done, I pulled out my phone from my pocket. I had secretly pressed the record button to capture everything, and the evidence I had wasn't just messages and this video. I also set up hidden cameras in our house and garage. "And Janice, I know everything about you too." Under my relentless confrontation, they both turned white as sheets. I was furious with James, but I couldn't forgive Janice either. I had thoroughly investigated my husband and figured out who she was. Janice was a 27-year-old new employee who worked with James in his new department. From the messages, it was clear she knew about me, yet she still went ahead with the affair, making her just as guilty. Sorry, Lisa," James whimpered, clearly not expecting to be cornered so perfectly. His pitiful attempt to plead with me only filled me with more disgust. I glared at both of them with all the anger I could muster. "I won't forgive either of you. Get ready to pay alimony." Hearing my firm words, and perhaps realizing their fate, both of them collapsed to their knees. After that, I divorced James. The fact that I had recorded everything and gathered all the evidence paid off. They were ordered to pay $500,000 in compensation. I was also able to get $1,000 a month in child support from my husband. But their troubles didn't stop there. I heard that news of their affair spread throughout the whole company, especially since they worked in the same department. This made things very uncomfortable for them, and eventually they broke up. Their coworkers started to disapprove of them, and in the end, they had no choice but to resign. Now, I've heard they're struggling with the burden of the compensation payments and are left with nothing. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying peaceful days with Julia. I'm focused on giving her lots of love and support, knowing she has a special gift. I want to make sure she grows up happy and well taken care of.